at lesson 3 and we're gonna finalize your entire illustration. Not everybody does it like this, but this is how I do it. I like to, after the watercolor is done and dry, I like to add pencil and then ink to kind of finalize everything. Not a lot of people use pencil on top of the watercolor. I do. It's just personal preference. So if you're new and you want to skip this part, go for it, but I wouldn't. I think it adds something really special to it, an additional layer. You can use any colored pencils that you'd like. I use Prismacolored pencils. I don't know why. Something about the pigment and the texture of them, everything goes on so nicely. I've never ever used another brand, so I can't really tell you other brands that are good. I used them once in college and I'm hooked. I'll never change. So I'm gonna recommend those, but if you're a beginner, obviously any set will do as you're learning. So what colors do you choose? When you get these sets of pencils, they come in so many shades. You want to get a group of shades that are in your fashion illustration, but you want to always choose one shade darker. So for instance, you have the emerald in the shoes here, so you want to pick a darker green that's the same shade, just darker. The bright fuchsia in the skirt, a little bit darker with the pencil. And for the bag, I'm going actually kind of a bronzy color. And then for skin tones and hair, I'm choosing a range of kind of oranges and peaches and then darker shades for the hair. We are gonna start actually right at the top with her eyebrows because we didn't give her any. You can just take one of the darker shades from the hair and just kind of very lightly shade that in. The reason that we didn't do this with watercolor, or why I don't do this with watercolor, is it's very hard to control. So if you very carefully put it in with watercolor, that could work, but it also could not work, and you could end up with kind of a forehead of a line that's very hard to fix. So I'm going to just very lightly shade in her eyebrows in a light shade, don't get too dark, and with that same shade, I'm putting in just a few lines above her eyes, just to kind of accent where an eyeliner would be. I'm also going to take the same shade and push a little bit harder and give her some lashes. All different lengths are totally fine. You can do lashes differently. My illustrations, we love a good lash, so I'm going to do that. I also stylize my work and like to bring her lash line out a little bit farther. After you kind of look at the eyes, you're going to start to see how this work is going to take shape. So I like to add a little bit of pencil right wherever I feel like it, and pupil of her eyes, just kind of adding each step that we did earlier, but giving it a little bit more detail. The eyes are really, really important, so you don't want to get too heavy with those. We can always do that with ink. I just kind of take the same color and, you know, give it a little bit, go over our outlines in the face. This is a nice kind of like olivey color. I think that looks really, really nice instead of like a stark black line everywhere. And this is where you kind of become a little bit of an artist. And if you really want to kind of shade areas in, you can do that and get sketchy and keep a little bit sketchy too. So what I like to do is do that first, and then I'll take a little bit of a darker shade and I'll highlight this hair. So under here is where we added our dark paint, and I like to just kind of go over some of those lines and even make it a little bit sketchier. Why not? You're a fashion illustrator, but you're an illustrator, so it should still look like artwork. And I like to just kind of get a little detail in there, go over the original lines. I like to work at the top first because once her face is done, the personality kind of comes out in that. Before you go any further, you want to take those skin tones. I pulled a few different ones here. This is orange, but we do have a little bit of orange up in her eyes that in the eyeshadow that we can make a little bit brighter if, you know, if you like that sort of a thing. I like to kind of make her cheeks a little bit rosier and get in here for some shadows. Just where shadows would hit on your regular face, and if you're unsure about that because you're new, just look in the mirror and really take a look because it's easy to see. I'm going to keep her lips pretty nude for this, but I will kind of use this kind of muted flesh tone just to give her more of a full figured lip there. And at this point, we're going to keep going. So we want to keep this shirt pretty neutral. We can either use a nude or a gray. You can't really mess this up, but all you're doing is going over these original lines that were pencil lines. Keep your pencil moving really quickly. Don't overthink it. Get scratchy with it and just kind of keep moving your pencil around. I'm even going to go over these buttons and over my collar lines. It's amazing how it just kind of changes the tone of the pencil. This is where her sleeve would be, and I like to just kind of put those lines in very lightly. I'm still going to go over this line. I want to keep it and just do whatever feels right there. As an artist, I like to kind of fill this part in and just make it a little bit more interesting than it was to begin with. I'm going to put this in ink, this bow, so the rest of it I will just shade in. Now this color that we used up in her cheek, this kind of peachy color, is the same color that you want to use on her arms and legs for the accents. Same places that you gave accents before, just kind of add those in. Very scribbly and scratchy, no real technique to it. Don't do too much outlining, but feel free to kind of just fill in when you feel like it. I always bring it down to her feet too, because I don't want to leave that part out. And I just think that adding the pencil just adds a little bit more depth to your drawing. You know, add as much or as little as you want. Feel free to stylize it as much as you want. And I'm going to get in here too, because that's the shadow of her skirt. And I think for this stage, for the skin tone, we're done. We're also going to need to add a little bit of pencil to her bag, just so you can see the shape a little bit more defined. Again, go over those same pencil lines. I keep a ruler next to me in case you need to make this nice and neat, but I like that you kind of just make it into your own little piece of art. So I'm just kind of adding some shades to that bag. And then I'm going to do the same for the shoes. So I mentioned that my artwork is stylized, and that is because I want clients to hire me because of, you know, things that are recognizable to my drawings. And I have a lot of those things, but one of the things that makes my drawings really recognizable is, for instance, on the shoes, usually their laces are very swirly and exaggerated. So I try to add that when it makes sense. There's no real theme to it. I just give it a little, like as if it's a little bow, and that just is always kind of signature when it makes sense. You can kind of pick your own characteristics that you want to add to your fashion illustrations, but that's something that if there are ankle straps or laces on shoes, that I personally like to add just a personal touch that I love. And at this point, I really like the way that this water in the skirt has taken shape, so we're just going to clean it up without scribbling over it like I normally would. Just gonna kind of clean up the outside lines and let that stand on its own. Pretty much everything else that we are going to add is going to be in ink, so that will be the final stage. I also use Prismacolor ink, really just because when I go to pick up my pencils, they always have these really thin ink pens. You can use any kind you want. The reason that I use Prismacolor ink is because look at how thin this is. The tip is almost non-existent. You can hardly see it. the lines are so thin that it really looks like a pencil. I prefer that. So we're going to ink her in Prismacolor ink.